Hey, you're looking cute today. Subscribe for more, and let's dive in.
You know how some days just have a certain stillness to them, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. This was one of those days, a hot, lazy Tuesday. In the middle of July, I was holed up in my room, the blinds drawn against the oppressive California sun, the only sound the hum of my computer and the frantic clicking of my mouse. On one monitor, I had a job search website open. It was a carefully curated performance piece for my dad, displaying a list of entry-level positions I had absolutely no intention of applying for. Junior data analyst, logistics coordinator. The words blurred together into a meaningless soup of corporate jargon. The real action was on my main monitor, where I was deep in a firefight in a game of Valorant. My team was down. It was match point, and I was the last one standing. My heart was pounding. My focus absolute. This was where I felt alive, not scanning job listings for a future I didn't want. I was lining up the perfect headshot, the enemy agent's silhouette just appearing in my crosshairs, when my world exploded. Bam! My bedroom door flew open with a force that rattled the posters on my wall. I flinched so hard my shot went wide, and a split second later, the word defeat flashed across my screen in mocking red letters. I slammed my mouse down on the desk in frustration. "What the hell, Sarah?" I yelled, spinning around in my chair. My little sister stood in the doorway, a vision of calculated mischief. She was 17. All sharp angles and a smirk that could curdle milk. She had her hands on her hips, one foot tapping impatiently on the hardwood floor. "Hey, big brother," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Busy day of career development." She craned her neck to pointedly look at the gaming screen, then back at the job listings. "Looks like you're really multitasking." I grumbled, closing the game client. "What do you want?" I was in the middle of something. I know, losing. By the looks of it. She sauntered into the room, her eyes darting around before landing on me with a predatory gleam. "Anyway, I need a favor, a big one." I sighed. A favor from Sarah was never just a favor. It was a binding contract, usually with hidden clauses that only benefited her. "I'm not lending you money, and I'm not doing your homework." "Oh, it's much more interesting than that," she said, her grin widening. She leaned against my desk, her proximity making me uneasy. I was thinking about Dad's machine. My blood ran cold, the casual way she said it, as if she were talking about borrowing the car. "No," I said, the word coming out flat and absolute. "Absolutely not. Forget it." Dad's machine, as Sarah so nonchalantly called it, was not a toy. It was a decommissioned piece of experimental government tech that my dad, a brilliant but ethically flexible physicist, had acquired through some back channels he never explained. It was a body-swapping device, and we knew it worked because we'd tried it once. Just once. It had been Sarah's idea. Of course, a year ago, she'd spun some tale about wanting to know what it was like to be taller, to have a guy's perspective for a day. I, in a moment of monumental stupidity, had agreed. The swap itself was disorienting, but manageable. The aftermath was the disaster. It turned out I had unwittingly swapped into her body on the first day of her period. I spent the next 24 hours in a hormonal-fueled nightmare of cramps that felt like a gremlin was trying to claw its way out of my abdomen, mood swings that had me weeping at a commercial for cat food, and a general feeling of bloated misery I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I'd sworn, with every fiber of my being, that I would never, ever do it again. "Come on, Alex," she wheedled, poking my arm. "It's not a big deal. It's just for a few hours." The last time was just for a day, and it was the worst day of my life. I shot back, "No. The answer is no. End of discussion." But this is important. My friends and I want to drive to Reno for a concert tonight. We already have tickets. I stared at her. Reno. That's like a 4-hour drive. And you're 17. You can't even rent a car. Exactly, she said, as if I'd just solved the puzzle for her. But you can. You're 21. You have a valid driver's license and a credit card. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. You want to borrow my body, to be my age, to drive your friends to Reno. Bingo, she said, snapping her fingers. See, you get it. I'll be you. Rent the car. Drive everyone up. We'll see the show. I'll drive back tomorrow morning. You get to hang out here. Relax. It's a win-win. It's a win for you and a catastrophic. Body horror loss for me, I said, shaking my head. No way. Sarah, it's insane. It's illegal. What if you get in an accident? What if you get pulled over? It's my face. My license. My problem. I'm a great driver, she scoffed. Better than you. You drive like a grandpa. That's because I'm not trying to break the sound barrier in a 10-year-old sedan. The answer is still no. I turned back to my computer, hoping it was a clear enough signal that the conversation was over. It wasn't. Her voice dropped, losing its wheedling tone and taking on a sharp, dangerous edge. Okay, we can do it your way. I glanced back at her. Her sweet, mischievous smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. This was the real Sarah. Here's the deal. Alex, she said, her voice low and steady. Either you agree to help me, or I go downstairs right now and have a little chat with Dad. I'll tell him how his beloved son, who swore up and down he was spending 8 hours a day job hunting, has actually been playing video games for the last 3 weeks straight. I'll tell him how you close the job tab every time you hear his footsteps. I'll mention how the only application you've filled out is for a new skin for your favorite character. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. My dad wasn't a tyrant, but he had a very clear set of rules. I was living at home, rent-free, under the strict condition that I was actively and earnestly seeking employment. He'd given me until the end of the summer. If he found out I was just goofing off, he wouldn't just be angry, he'd be disappointed. And his disappointment was 1,000 times worse than his anger. He'd pull the plug on my internet, take my computer, and probably tell me to start packing my bags. The threat wasn't just about losing my gaming time, it was about losing my home. She saw the panic in my eyes and pressed her advantage. How long do you think your free ride will last when he finds that out? You'll be lucky if you're not working at the gas station by Monday. So, what's it going to be? A few hours in my fabulous body, or a lifetime of asking people if they want paper or plastic? She had me. It was a perfect checkmate. Every escape route was blocked. I looked from her triumphant face to my darkened gaming monitor, the ghost of my defeat still lingering on the screen. It felt like a metaphor for my life. I let out a long, slow breath, the air hissing through my teeth. The fight was gone. Fine, I muttered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Fine, you win. Her sinister smile instantly morphed back into a radiant, victorious grin. I knew you'd see it my way. Come on, let's not waste any time. The girls are waiting. She grabbed my hand and pulled me out of my chair, dragging me towards the basement, towards the humming, ominous machine that was about to turn my entire world upside down. Again. The basement was my dad's sanctuary and, to me, a place of deep foreboding. It smelled of ozone, solder, and old coffee. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines, and shelves were crammed with circuit boards, oscilloscopes, and devices I couldn't begin to name. In the center of it all sat the machine. It wasn't a single object, but an assembly. Two sleek, minimalist pods, like something out of a sci-fi movie, faced each other. They were made of a polished white material that seemed to absorb the light. They were connected by a thick bundle of cables to a central console, a formidable tower of humming fans, blinking LEDs, and a single, large, ominous-looking screen that was currently dark. "You know the drill," Sarah said. Already hopping into the left pod and sitting down, she looked completely at ease, like she was settling into a comfy armchair. I, on the other hand, felt a wave of nausea. My palms were sweating. I could still remember the feeling, the strange, non-physical vertigo, the sensation of being stretched and pulled apart at a molecular level. "I hate this," I mumbled, reluctantly stepping into the right-hand pod. The seat was cool against my skin. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she said, already fiddling with the small keypad on her armrest. "Just think of it as a temporary change of scenery. A very, very intimate change of scenery." She winked. I just glared at her as I strapped myself in. The restraints were soft but firm, clicking into place over my chest and lap. Sarah initiated the sequence from her pod. A low, deep hum started to vibrate through the floor, a sound you felt more in your bones than heard with your ears. The lights on the central console began to blink in a steady, rhythmic pattern, and the dark screen flickered to life, displaying a cascade of green code. "Okay, sequence initiated," Sarah's voice said, slightly tinny through the pod's small speaker. "Synchronization in 5, 4. I closed my eyes and braced myself. 3, 2, 1. The hum escalated into a high-pitched whine that seemed to drill directly into my brain. A brilliant, cobalt blue light flooded my vision, even through my closed eyelids. It wasn't hot, but it felt heavy. And then came the sensation. It started at the tips of my fingers and toes. A weird tingling, like a limb falling asleep, but 1,000 times more intense. It spread rapidly up my arms and legs, a feeling of dissolving, of my physical form becoming staticky and ill-defined. It felt like being pulled through a keyhole. My consciousness, my sense of self, was stretched thin like taffy, elongated into a single, screaming thread of awareness. There was a moment of pure, terrifying non-existence, a void where I wasn't Alex, I wasn't anyone, I was just a point of view. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. There was a jarring, brutal snap. It felt like being dropped from a great height, not onto a hard surface, but into something, into a new container. The wine faded, the blue light vanished, and I was left in blinking, disoriented silence. For a second, nothing seemed different. Then I took a breath. My lungs felt smaller. The air didn't seem to go as deep. I opened my eyes. The world was a few inches lower than it should have been. The first thing I saw was a pair of hands resting on the pod's armrests. They weren't my hands. They were smaller, slender, with perfectly shaped nails painted in a shade of glossy, bubblegum pink. I flexed the fingers and watched, mesmerized and horrified, as they obeyed my command. My brain was connected to them. Slowly, I looked down. The reality hit me like a physical blow. A pair of small, firm breasts pushed against the fabric of a thin t-shirt. I could feel their weight, a gentle but constant pressure on my chest that was utterly alien. My field of vision was partially obscured by long, dark brown hair that had fallen forward over my shoulders. When I moved my head, the hair swayed and tickled my cheek. My center of gravity was completely off. I felt top-heavy and unstable. I was wearing a pair of denim shorts that felt impossibly tight around my hips and thighs. The fabric-hugging curves that weren't mine. A laugh echoed from the other pod. It was my laugh, my voice, but the cadence was all Sarah. I looked up. There I was. Or rather, my body was, unbuckling the restraints. She stood up, stretching with a familiar groan that sounded bizarre coming from my own throat. "Well, howdy, partner," Sarah said, her new, deeper voice full of smug satisfaction. She flexed my biceps and grinned. "Man, I forgot how much upper body strength you have. This is great." I tried to speak, to yell at her, but the voice that came out was a shock. It was higher, lighter, and felt completely foreign. This is so weird." "You get used to it," she said dismissively. She patted her pockets, pulling out my wallet and my car keys. She tossed them in the air and caught them with a swagger I definitely didn't possess. "All right, I've got a car to rent and a road to hit. My phone is on the nightstand in my room. Don't lose it." Panic surged through me. "Wait! What about my phone?" Sarah pulled my phone out of my jeans pocket and waved it. "I'll be needing this, for GPS, and, because it's my phone for the day." She gave me a wicked grin. "Don't wait up." Before I could protest, she was halfway up the basement stairs. "Sarah!" "Wait!" I yelled in my new, ridiculously high voice. I fumbled with the restraints on my pod. My new, smaller fingers feeling clumsy and weak. By the time I got them undone and tried to stand, my legs wobbled beneath me. The shift in balance was so profound, I had to grab the side of the pod to keep from falling over. I stumbled towards the stairs, but it was too late. I heard the door at the top of the basement swing shut, followed by the distinct, final, and utterly soul-crushing click of a lock. She'd locked me in the basement. I lunged for the door, my new, shorter legs feeling awkward and uncoordinated. I rattled the knob, locked, solid. "Sarah!" I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation. "You can't just leave me here." There was no answer. I heard her footsteps moving away, then the sound of the front door opening and closing. She was gone. I was alone, trapped, not just in the basement, but in this strange, unfamiliar body. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, the long hair falling around my face like a curtain. I looked down again at the pink nails, the slender wrists, the curve of her hips. This wasn't a temporary change of scenery. This was a prison, and my sister had just walked off with the key. After a few minutes of uselessly pounding on the door and yelling until my strange new throat felt raw, I gave up, defeated. I trudged back over to the machine. The pods were silent now, their lights dark. They looked like sarcophagi. I slumped into Sarah's pod, the one I had just vacated, and put my head in my new, delicate hands. The silence of the basement was absolute. I was stuck here until she decided to come back. What was I supposed to do? I felt a flicker of hope. My dad. He'd be home from work eventually. He could let me out. But then a worse thought hit me. What would I even tell him? Hey, Dad, it's me, Alex. I'm in Sarah's body because she blackmailed me into letting her borrow mine to drive to Reno. Yeah. Right. That would go over well. I'd be grounded until I was 30. No. I was on my own. I had to get out of the basement. There had to be another way. I scanned the room. There was a small, high window near the ceiling, the kind that lets in a sliver of daylight at ground level. It was way too small for a person to fit through. No other doors. My eyes fell on Sarah's discarded clothes from before the swap, a crumpled heap on the floor, and next to them, her phone. I'd forgotten she'd left it. It was my only connection to the outside world. I walked over and picked it up. The case was a nightmare of pink glitter that shed tiny, iridescent flakes all over my fingers. I pressed the home button. The screen lit up with a picture of her and her friends, all making duck faces at the camera. The phone was locked. Of course, I tried her birthday. No luck. I tried our dog's name. Nothing. Then I remembered a conversation I'd overheard. She was complaining that her friend copied her passcode. 1234. Seriously, I typed it in. It clicked open. I could have wept with relief. First things first. I tried calling my own number. It rang once, twice, then went to my voicemail. Sarah had declined the call. Of course she had. I sent a text. Let me out of the basement. This isn't funny. A minute later, a reply came. From my own number. Chillax. The door isn't locked. It just sticks sometimes. You have to jiggle the handle. I stared at the phone. Was she serious? I scrambled back to the stairs, my heart pounding with a new hope. I grabbed the old brass knob, turned it, and this time, instead of just pulling, I jiggled it up and down while pushing. There was a clunk, and the door swung open. I stood there, bathed in the dim light of the hallway, feeling like an absolute idiot. She had played me again. She hadn't locked me in. She'd just relied on my panic and my ignorance of the door's quirks. Freedom, however, was a mixed blessing. I was out of the basement, but I was still in her body. I walked through the quiet house, every step a new exploration in alien physiology, the gentle sway of my hips, the way my thighs brushed together, the slight bounce in my chest. It was a constant, unnerving stream of new sensory information. I instinctively went to my room, only to find the door shut. I tried the handle. Locked. For real this time. She had locked me out of my own room, my sanctuary, my clothes, my computer. My entire life was behind that door, and she had the key. So I was stuck. I couldn't be Alex. I had to be Sarah. I trudged to her room, the door mockingly ajar. It was like stepping into a different universe. The walls were a soft lavender, adorned with fairy lights and photos of her friends. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and hairspray. A fluffy white rug covered the floor, and her bed was a mountain of pillows and blankets. It was aggressively, unapologetically feminine. And then there was the problem of clothes. The t-shirt and shorts I was wearing felt constricting. The denim was digging into my waist, and the shirt was just a little too tight across the shoulders. I needed something more comfortable. I opened her closet, hoping to find a simple baggy sweatshirt and some sweatpants. I was an optimist, a fool. The closet was an explosion of color and fabric. There were no baggy sweatshirts. There were crop tops, spaghetti strap camisoles, and sheer blouses. There were no sweatpants. There were skinny jeans, leggings patterned with leopard print, and an entire section of skirts and dresses. It was a minefield of clothing designed to hug, reveal, and accentuate. Nothing was designed for comfort. I rummaged through the hangers, my frustration growing. I finally found something that looked promising. A simple, dark blue dress made of a soft, cottony material. It looked loose and airy. I pulled off the tight shorts and t-shirt, the process feeling clumsy. Taking off a shirt is different when you have to navigate it over breasts. I pulled the dress over my head. The fabric cascaded down, cool and light against my skin. It ended just above my knees. It was comfortable, way more comfortable than the shorts. I felt a small sense of victory. Then I moved. The fabric swirled around my legs, a completely new sensation. I sat on her bed, and my instincts took over. I started to sit with my knees apart, the way I always do. The dress rode up my thighs, and I had a sudden, shocking realization that I was completely exposed. I snapped my knees together, a movement so foreign it felt like a deliberate, conscious act of contortion. How did girls sit like this all the time? It felt unnatural. Another problem was my hair. The long strands kept falling into my face, tickling my nose and getting in my eyes. I found a hair tie on her dresser and tried to pull it all back into a ponytail. It was a disaster. I was used to short hair that did what it was told. This was a wild, silky entity with a mind of its own. I ended up with a lopsided, messy bun, with half the hair escaping to cascade down my neck. The feeling of those loose strands against the sensitive skin of my nape sent a weird shiver down my spine. Defeated and uncomfortably aware of my new form, I collapsed onto her bed, sinking into the pile of pillows. I grabbed her phone again. What else was I going to do? I started scrolling through her messages. A blatant invasion of privacy I justified by my current predicament. It was an eye-opener. There were endless group chats with her friends, filled with a dizzying array of slang and emojis I didn't understand. And then I saw the conversations with boys. Plural. She was juggling at least 3 different guys, sending flirty, teasing messages to each of them. One of them was named Chad, a jock from her school. Another was a college guy named Kevin. And the third, my stomach dropped. The third was Mark, my friend. Mark. He and I played games together almost every night. Mark. You up for a raid later? Sarah. Maybe. Depends on if you can convince me. Mark. Oh yeah. What kind of convincing are we talking about, Sarah? You'll have to get creative. G6. I felt a bizarre mix of emotions. I was annoyed at her for flirting with my friend. I was angry at Mark for falling for it. And there was another, stranger feeling. A tiny, ugly flicker of something that felt suspiciously like jealousy. It made no sense. I wasn't jealous of Mark. I was jealous for Sarah. It was too confusing to untangle. I tossed the phone onto the bed with a groan. I was trapped in my sister's body, locked out of my own room. And now I had discovered she was a master manipulator of the male species, including my own friends. This day was already a complete disaster, and I had a terrible feeling it was only just beginning. Just as I was sinking into a new level of despair, contemplating the sheer unfairness of my situation. The phone buzzed on the bed beside me. The screen lit up, the glittery case catching the light from the fairy lights. The name on the screen made my heart perform a series of gymnastic maneuvers it had no business attempting. Ella? Ella? My Ella. Well, not my Ella. She was a friend, a mutual friend of mine and Sarah's, who lived a few houses down the street, and I had been nursing a colossal debilitating crush on her for the better part of 2 years. Ella was smart, funny, and had a smile that could probably power a small city. She was also To put it mildly, gorgeous. The kind of girl I could barely form coherent sentences around. My thumb hovered over the answer button. What was I supposed to do if I answered? I'd have to talk to her, in this voice, as Sarah. If I didn't answer, she might think something was wrong. Panic set in. My brain was screaming, abort, abort, but my thumb, apparently with a will of its own, swiped right. Hello, I said. And the voice that came out was a breathy, nervous squeak. I cleared my throat and tried again, aiming for something resembling Sarah's casual tone. Hey, Sarah. Hey, I was starting to think you were ghosting me. Ella's voice chirped through the speaker. It was even more melodic and cheerful than I remembered. My stomach did another flip. No, just, busy, I stammered. You know, stuff. Lame. So lame. Well, unbusy yourself. It's boiling hot today, and my parents are out for the afternoon. I've got the pool all to myself, and it's getting lonely. Come over and swim. A pool party. With Ella. The male part of my brain. The part that had been dormant and terrified for the last hour. Suddenly roared to life. It presented me with a very vivid, high-definition image of Ella in a bikini. My face flushed. A sensation that felt different on these cheeks. It was a hotter, more concentrated blush. Then reality crashed back in. A pool party meant I would have to wear a swimsuit. A girl's swimsuit. And I would have to be in it. In public. Or at least, in front of Ella. The thought was mortifying. Oh, I don't know. Ella, I said, trying to sound hesitant. I'm not really feeling it today. Oh, come on, don't be lame. It'll be fun. We can work on our tans. Listen to music. Complain about boys. It'll be great. Her voice was so persuasive. So full of sunshine. And that one phrase, complain about boys, sent a weird jolt through me. What would she say? Would she ever complain about me? The internal conflict was raging. My inherent terror of the situation versus my deep, unyielding desire to be near Ella. The desire won. It wasn't even a fair fight. Okay, I heard myself say, the word escaping before I could stop it. Yeah, okay, I'll come over. Yes, awesome. See you in 10, she said, and hung up. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling slightly. What had I just done? I had 10 minutes to transform myself from a miserable, pajama-clad imposter into a pool-ready teenage girl. First, the swimsuit. I scrambled back to Sarah's room and threw open her dresser drawers. Rummaging through piles of neatly folded clothes, I found the underwear drawer, first a sea of lace and silk in every color imaginable that I slammed shut immediately, my face burning. The next drawer down was socks. Finally, in the bottom drawer, I found them. Swimsuits. My heart sank. Just as I had feared from my closet exploration, Sarah did not own anything sensible or modest. There were no one-piece swimsuits. There was no tankini. It was a collection of bikinis. Tiny, brightly colored, string-based triangles of fabric that looked like they offered about as much coverage as a couple of well-placed postage stamps. I picked one out at random. It was a vibrant turquoise color. I held up the top. It was 2 small triangles of fabric connected by a thin string. The bottoms were equally minuscule. This was a nightmare. This was my personal, custom-designed hell. There was no backing out now. I had already agreed. With a deep, shaky breath, I stripped off the comfortable cotton dress and stood in front of the full-length mirror on the back of Sarah's door. I avoided looking at my reflection. Putting it on was an exercise in humiliation and engineering. The bottoms went on easily enough, but they felt incredibly revealing. The fabric was a thin, tight layer against my skin, and I was acutely aware of every curve of my new hips and backside. Then came the top. I fumbled with the string that was supposed to tie around my back. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. After a few tries, I finally managed a knot. It felt tight and constricting. Then there was the string that went around my neck. I tied that one, and the effect was immediate. The underwire in the top lifted my chest, pushing the soft tissue up and together, creating a cleavage that was startlingly deep. It felt like I was wearing some kind of complicated, decorative harness. The sensation was bizarre. My skin felt cold where it was exposed to the air, which was most of it. A slight draft from the air conditioner vent made me shiver. I could feel the gentle pressure of the straps on my neck and the tightness of the band around my ribs. I forced myself to look in the mirror. For a long moment, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. It was a girl, a slim, pretty girl with long dark hair, wide eyes, and a turquoise bikini that highlighted a surprisingly athletic figure. She looked nervous and out of place, and she was me. The disconnect between the image in the mirror and the person in my head was so profound it made me feel dizzy. This was my sister's body, a body I had seen my whole life, but I had never, ever seen it from this perspective. I saw the way the bikini top pushed my breasts together. I saw the gentle curve of her stomach and the flare of her hips. It was the body of a stranger I was currently inhabiting. I grabbed a towel from her bathroom, wrapping it around myself so tightly it was practically a tourniquet. I found a pair of flip-flops by the door and slid my feet into them. The motion felt strangely dainty. I took one last, terrified look in the mirror. "You can do this," I whispered, but the high, soft voice that answered back only made me feel more like an imposter. "Just act natural." Natural. Right. There was absolutely nothing natural about this. The walk to Ella's house was the longest 50 yards of my life. Every rustle of leaves, every car that drove by, felt like an accusation. I was hyper-aware of the feeling of the flip-flops slapping against the soles of my feet, the slight jiggle in my chest with each step, and the way the towel, my only shield, felt precariously loose. I clutched it with a death grip. I reached her front gate and took a deep breath before pushing it open. The backyard was an oasis, a sparkling blue pool, comfortable-looking lounge chairs, and a speaker playing some chill indie pop. And there, by the edge of the pool, was Ella. She was even more stunning than I'd imagined. She was wearing a simple, sporty-looking black bikini that made her look athletic and effortlessly beautiful. Her blonde hair was piled in a messy bun on top of her head, and she was applying sunscreen to her legs. She looked up as I approached, and her face broke into that signature kilowatt smile. "You made it," she called out, standing up. My brain went into panic mode. She was coming over to me. What do girls do when they greet each other? A hug, a wave. I froze. She solved the problem for me by wrapping me in a quick, friendly hug. It was over in a second. But it was a sensory overload. The feeling of her arms around my towel-wrapped body, the faint scent of coconut from her sunscreen, the brief pressure of her cheek against mine. It was both wonderful and terrifying. "Glad you could come," she said, pulling back. "Grab a chair. Want a drink? I made lemonade." "Lemonade sounds great," I managed to say, my voice still a little shaky. I chose a lounge chair as far from the pool as possible, and sat down gingerly. Keeping the towel firmly in place, Ella handed me a tall glass of lemonade, condensation beading on its side. It was ice cold and delicious, and the simple act of sipping it helped to calm my racing heart. "Okay, don't just sit there like a mummy," Ella said with a laugh, gesturing to my towel. "The sun's amazing. Let's get some color." This was it, the moment of truth. There was no way to avoid it. Slowly, reluctantly, I stood up and unwrapped the towel. I felt a dozen imaginary eyes on me, even though it was just Ella, and she wasn't even looking. I folded the towel and placed it on the chair, then lay down on my stomach, hoping it would be less exposing. The vinyl of the lounge chair was hot against my skin. The sun felt warm and pleasant on my back and the backs of my legs. It was almost nice. "Hey, you missed a spot," Ella said. I turned my head to see her standing over me, holding a bottle of sunscreen. "Your back is going to be toast if you're not careful. Want some help?" My brain short-circuited. Ella, offering to put sunscreen on my back. My crush. My friend. Who thought I was my sister? Sure, I mumbled into the towel I was using as a pillow. I heard the squirt of the lotion, and then I felt it. Her hands, they were cool from the lemonade glass, and the lotion was even cooler. She started at my shoulders, her fingers moving in smooth, circular motions. The sensation was electric. I could feel the light pressure of her palms, the gentle glide of her fingertips over my skin. It wasn't a sensual touch. It was just friendly, matter of fact. But to me, in my hyper-aware state, it was everything. She worked her way down my back, over my shoulder blades, to the small of my back just above the line of my bikini bottoms. A shiver ran through me. A completely involuntary reaction. "Whoa, you cold?" she asked, her hands pausing. "No, just, the lotion's cold." I lied quickly. "Oh, sorry," she said, and continued, her hands a little warmer now. When she was done, she patted my shoulder. "All set. Don't want you getting a burn." "Thanks," I said, my voice muffled. I was so flustered I didn't think I could look at her. The whole experience had lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it had completely scrambled my thoughts. It was the most intimate contact I had ever had with her, and it was happening under the most bizarre, fraudulent circumstances imaginable. "Okay, I'm dying of heat," she announced. "Last one in is a rotten egg." With a whoop, she took a running start and jumped into the pool with a huge splash. She surfaced a moment later, slicking her wet hair back from her face and grinning. "Come on, Sarah. The water's perfect." I knew I couldn't lie on the lounger forever. Taking a deep breath, I stood up and walked to the edge of the pool. Every step felt like I was on a stage. I was so conscious of how I was moving, trying not to be too clumsy or too masculine. I dipped a toe in. The water was refreshingly cool. I slid in slowly, the water rising up my legs, over my stomach, until I was submerged to my shoulders. The feeling was incredible. The cool water was a welcome relief from the heat and my own nervous sweat. It enveloped me, the pressure of it a comforting sensation against my skin. The turquoise bikini clung to my body, the fabric suddenly heavier. My long hair, which had been a constant annoyance, was now floating around my head like a dark halo. When I pushed it back, the wet strands stuck to my neck and shoulders. Ella swam over to me. "See? Isn't this better than being cooped up inside?" "Yeah," I admitted. And this time, it was genuine. It really is. We floated there for a while, talking, Or rather, she talked, and I mostly listened, offering up non-committal ahas and totallys whenever it seemed appropriate. She talked about a teacher she didn't like, a new album she was obsessed with, and her summer job lifeguarding at the community center. I found myself watching her, the way water beaded on her shoulders, the way she laughed. A genuine, uninhibited sound. At one point, I realized I had been staring at her for way too long. She was in the middle of a story, and I was just gazing. She paused. What she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. I panicked. My mind went completely blank. Oh, nothing, I stammered. I really like your swimsuit. It's sporty. Her smile widened. Sporty, thanks. I guess it's practical for my job. She gave me a playful, quizzical look. You're acting a little weird today. You know that. Am I? I tried to laugh it off. A high-pitched, awkward sound. I'm just tired. Long night. Ah, she said, seeming to accept the explanation. Well, a little floating should fix that. She was right. As the minutes turned into an hour, something strange started to happen. The initial, overwhelming sense of panic and awkwardness began to fade. The constant, nagging awareness of the alien body I was in started to recede into the background. I was still aware of the long hair, the weight on my chest, the bikini clinging to my skin. But it was becoming less of a shrieking alarm and more of a background hum. I was adapting. I found myself moving more naturally in the water, paddling with my hands to stay afloat without even thinking about it, when a strand of hair fell in my face. I brushed it away with a flick of my wrist that felt, for a split second, completely natural. I was starting to get the hang of being Sarah. And that thought was, in its own way, even more terrifying than the initial shock. After we'd been in the pool for what felt like a couple of hours, the intense heat of the midday sun began to soften. Ella swam over to a corner of the pool where a large, inflatable flamingo float was bobbing peacefully. Okay, serious relaxation time, she announced, hoisting herself up onto the bright pink bird with a practiced grace. It was a huge float, easily big enough for two. She patted the space behind her. Hop on, let's just drift. My first instinct was to say no, to keep a safe distance, but I'd come this far. Saying no now would just seem weird again. So, with a bit more awkwardness than she'd displayed, I pulled myself up onto the float, my wet skin squeaking against the plastic. I ended up sitting right behind her, our backs almost touching, our legs dangling in the water side by side. The proximity was intense. I could feel the warmth radiating from her back, and when the float shifted, our arms would brush against each other. My heart started that familiar, frantic drumming against my ribs. But this time, something was different. The fear, the desperate urge to run away, wasn't there. It was replaced by a kind of nervous excitement, a quiet thrill. I was no longer just enduring this situation. A small, treacherous part of me was actually starting to enjoy it. Not the deception, but the closeness, the experience. We floated in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the sides of the pool and the distant buzz of a lawnmower. Then, Ella spoke, her voice softer than before. Can I ask you something kind of serious? Sure, I said, my own voice quiet. She hesitated for a moment, tracing a pattern on the plastic neck of the flamingo. It's about your brother. My blood turned to ice water. About me, Alex. What about him, I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral, like a sister who was mildly interested in her brother's affairs. I don't know, she sighed. Do you think does he ever talk about me? The question hit me like a ton of bricks. Here was the girl I had a massive crush on, asking my sister, who was secretly me, if I ever talked about her. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Sometimes, I said carefully. Why? I just feel like sometimes we have a really great connection. You know, we'll be talking and laughing. And it feels like there's something there, she said, her voice full of a vulnerability I had never heard from her before. But then he just pulls back. He gets all awkward and quiet. It's like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I can't figure him out. I was speechless. She thought we had a connection. She noticed. The awkwardness she was describing was my own pathetic inability to act like a normal human being around her. She didn't see it as me being a nervous wreck. She saw it as me being hot and cold, as me pulling away. He's just shy, I offered, the words feeling inadequate. He's not great at, feelings. I guess, she said, sounding unconvinced. She turned her head slightly to look at me, her eyes searching my face. It's so much easier talking to you. Sarah, you get it. I feel like I can tell you anything. I could never talk to a guy about this stuff, not even Alex. He's a sweetheart. But he just wouldn't understand. That single statement was a punch to the gut and a strange, unexpected gift all at once. A part of me, the Alex part, felt a sharp pang of jealousy. She was opening up, being real and vulnerable, and she felt she could only do it with Sarah. She thought Alex, the real me, was incapable of understanding. It stung. But another part of me, the part that was currently living in this body, felt a surge of something else. Privilege. I was being let into a secret room in her heart that Alex, the boy, would never have access to. I was here, on this ridiculous pink flamingo, closer to her emotionally than I had ever been, and it was all because I was a girl. I think he likes you, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. It felt like a confession. Ella's whole posture changed. She sat up a little straighter. Really, you think so? Yeah, I said, feeling a new, strange confidence. I was an imposter, but I was also the world's foremost expert on the subject of Alex's feelings for Ella. He's just an idiot. He doesn't know how to show it. A slow smile spread across Ella's face. A genuine, hopeful smile. Wow, she whispered. Thanks. Sarah, that actually helps a lot. She leaned back again, and this time her shoulder rested lightly against mine. The contact was casual, friendly, but it sent a jolt right through me. We drifted for a while longer, not talking, but the silence felt different now. It was filled with a new understanding. I had just played the part of the supportive best friend, the trusted confidant. I had given her advice about myself. The situation was absurd, a tangled knot of identities and deceptions. But as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, I realized my perspective had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't just a prisoner in my sister's body anymore. I was an observer, a participant. I was learning things about Ella, about how girls interact, about the different kinds of intimacy that exist. And in a weird, unsettling way, I was starting to understand something about myself. Too. Or at least, about the version of myself that everyone else saw. The initial horror was gone, replaced by a deep, powerful, and utterly consuming curiosity. As the sky started to bleed from blue to shades of orange and pink, Ella's mum's car pulled into their driveway. "Uh-oh. Party's over," she said with a sigh, sliding off the float into the water. That's my cue. We got out of the pool, and the evening air, which had seemed so warm before, now felt cool on my wet skin. I quickly wrapped the towel around myself again, the familiar shield feeling less like a necessity and more like a habit. We said our goodbyes, promising to text later. The hug this time was less awkward, more familiar. It was amazing how quickly a few hours of shared secrets on a plastic flamingo could change things. Walking back to Sarah's house, I felt a strange sense of melancholy. The day was over. The weird, exciting, terrifying bubble I had been in was about to pop. I let myself into the quiet house. Sarah was still gone, presumably living it up in Reno in my body. My room was still locked. So, it was back to Sarah's lavender-scented prison cell. I went straight to her adjoined bathroom. The person in the mirror was a mess. My hair was a tangled, chlorine-stiffened bird's nest. My face was flushed from the sun, and there were faint strap marks on my shoulders and back. I looked like a girl who had spent the afternoon at the pool. The process of taking off the wet bikini was a strange echo of putting it on. I untied the strings, my fingers more deft this time. The fabric peeled away from my skin, cold and damp. I dropped it in a heap on the floor and stepped into the shower. The experience of showering in this body was a whole new category of weird. I was used to a quick, efficient process, in and out in 5 minutes. But this was different. First, there was the hair. I squeezed a dollop of Sarah's strawberry-scented shampoo into my hand and worked it into the long, thick mane. It took forever. My arms started to get tired. Then came the conditioner, which made the hair feel impossibly slick and smooth. I used her body wash, a floral concoction that foamed up into a cloud of perfumed bubbles. The whole process was so involved, so sensory. By the time I was done, the entire bathroom smelled like a fruit basket, and I felt cleaner than I had ever felt in my life. I dried off with a plush, fluffy towel that was probably softer than anything I owned. My skin felt sensitive and new. The long, wet hair was heavy on my shoulders, dripping water down my back. I found a wide-toothed comb on the counter and began the painstaking process of detangling. It was slow, tedious work, requiring a patience I didn't know I possessed. Once I was done, I needed something to wear. The idea of putting on tight jeans or a restrictive top was completely unappealing. My eyes landed on a piece of clothing hanging on a hook on the back of the door. It was a nightgown. It was made of a dark, silky material, maybe satin with thin spaghetti straps. It looked simple and, more importantly, comfortable. On a whim, I slipped it on over my head. The sensation was incredible. The fabric was feather-light and cool, skimming over my body without clinging anywhere. It felt like wearing air. It flowed around me as I moved, a whisper of silk against my skin. After a day of tight denim and even tighter bikini strings, this felt like absolute freedom. I walked out of the steamy bathroom and into the bedroom. The fairy lights cast a soft, warm glow. I caught my reflection in the full-length mirror again. The girl staring back was different from the one I'd seen earlier. Her hair was dark and damp, curling slightly at the ends. Her face was clean and fresh-faced. The simple, dark nightgown fell gracefully, hinting at the curves underneath without displaying them. She looked soft, gentle. I sat on the edge of the bed, just looking at my reflection, and replayed the day in my head, the initial panic in the basement, the frustration in the closet, the terror of walking to Ella's house. But then, the feeling of the sun on my skin, the coolness of the pool, the shock and thrill of Ella's hands on my back, the weight of her secrets, shared in confidence. I realized with a jolt that I hadn't just been suffering through the day. I had been living it, experiencing it. The initial hatred and rejection of this body had slowly, imperceptibly, morphed into something else. It had become a vessel for a set of experiences I could never have had otherwise. The awkwardness was still there, but now it was mingled with a powerful, undeniable curiosity. What else was I missing? What else was different? This thought led me to her vanity. It was a pristine white desk with a large, well-lit mirror, an altar dedicated to the art of transformation. It was covered in an intimidating array of brushes, bottles, compacts, and palettes, pencils, tubes, pots of color. It was like a chemistry set for your face. Before today, I would have looked at it with detached amusement. Now, I looked at it with intrigue. On impulse, I sat down in the plush chair. I looked at the reflection in the vanity mirror. My face. Sarah's face. I picked up a tube of mascara. I'd seen her put it on 1,000,000 times. A quick, practiced flick of the wrist. I opened it and looked at the weird little brush. I brought it up to my eye, trying to copy the motion I remembered. The wand tickled my eyelashes, making me blink and flinch. I ended up with a small black smudge on my eyelid. I tried the other eye, a little more carefully this time. I looked closer. It actually worked. The lashes looked longer, darker, making the eyes seem bigger. Next, I found a pot of shimmery, light pink lip gloss. It smelled like bubblegum. I dabbed a little on my bottom lip. It felt sticky and strange, but when I pressed my lips together, it gave them a subtle shine. Finally, I picked up an eyeliner pencil. This looked like the advanced level. I remembered Sarah saying it took her months to get it right. I decided to skip the complicated winged look and just try to draw a thin line along my upper lash line. My hand was shaky. The line was wobbly and uneven. I looked like I'd been in a fight with a Sharpie. I grabbed a makeup wipe from a package on the desk and cleaned it off, then tried again, and again. On the third try, I managed a semi-straight line. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't a total disaster either. I leaned back and looked at the final result. The smudged mascara, the slightly crooked eyeliner, the shiny lips. It was clumsy, amateurish work, but it had changed my face. The person in the mirror looked older, more defined. It was still Sarah's face, but it was a version of her face that I had created. And for the first time all day, as I looked at that reflection, the girl in the silky nightgown with the clumsily applied makeup and the damp hair, I smiled. It wasn't a forced smile, or an awkward one. It was a genuine, curious, and deeply complicated smile. A smile of intrigue. I wasn't just wearing my sister's skin anymore. I was starting to try it on. Lying in Sarah's bed that night was a profoundly strange experience. The sheets were softer than mine, and they carried the same faint vanilla scent as her room. I was curled on my side, the silky nightgown pooling around me. My body felt tired in a way I wasn't used to, not the deep ache of physical exertion from a workout, but a lighter, more pervasive exhaustion from a day of constant sun, social navigation, and sensory input. My mind, however, was wide awake, buzzing with the day's events. My primary concern should have been simple. When was Sarah coming back? When could I have my own body, my own room, my own life back? The thought was still there, a baseline anxiety humming beneath the surface. I missed the familiar weight and strength of my own limbs. I missed the simplicity of my short hair. I missed being able to sit down without performing a complex logistical maneuver to preserve my modesty. But a new set of thoughts had woven themselves into that anxiety, complicating everything. The desperation I'd felt that morning had been diluted. It was no longer a singular, overwhelming desire to end this ordeal. Now, it was muddled. I thought about Ella. I thought about our conversation on the float. I had learned more about her, and about how she saw me, in those 10 minutes than I had in 2 years of friendship. It was a perspective I never could have gained as Alex, as a guy. I was an object of her curiosity and frustration. As a girl, I was her confidant. The power in that was undeniable, and a little intoxicating. What else could I learn? What other doors did this body open? I thought about the simple, physical sensations, the way the dress had swirled around my legs, the surprising comfort of the nightgown, the meticulous, almost ritualistic process of the shower. These were entire worlds of feeling and experience that had been completely invisible to me before. I had spent my whole life thinking of things like clothing and grooming as chores, as superficial nonsense. But after today, I was starting to see them differently. They weren't just about appearance, they were about sensation. They were about how you felt in your own skin. I found myself thinking about the makeup, the focused, delicate work it required, the immediate, transformative result. It was a kind of art, a way of presenting a specific version of yourself to the world. I had always dismissed it. But now I was curious. What would it be like to get it right? To master the eyeliner, to blend the eyeshadow, to find the right shade of lipstick. A part of me was horrified by these thoughts. This was my sister's life, her body. I was a tourist, an invader. I should be fighting against this, not embracing it. But another, more honest part of me had to admit that I was captivated. I had spent one day as a girl, and it had been the most terrifying, confusing, and unexpectedly fascinating day of my life. I still didn't know when Sarah would be back. She said tomorrow morning. But with Sarah, tomorrow morning could mean anything from sunrise to late afternoon. The uncertainty, which had been a source of pure dread, now felt different. It felt like an opportunity. Maybe this didn't have to be just a prison sentence I had to endure. Maybe I could use this time to understand her better, to understand Ella better, and in the process, maybe I could understand something about myself, about the roles we play and the sides of ourselves we hide from the world. The thought was both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. I was no longer just a victim of this bizarre twist of fate. I was becoming an active and willing participant. I rolled over, the satin of the nightgown cool against my skin, and closed my eyes, my head full of 1,000 conflicting thoughts. I was just starting to drift off, lulled by the soft hum of the air conditioner, when a familiar buzz vibrated on the nightstand. I reached out, my hand easily finding the phone in the dark. I squinted at the bright screen. It was another text message. From Ella. My heart gave a little flutter. Had so much fun today. Seriously, you're the best. We should do it again tomorrow. Pool's open. I stared at the message, at the winking emoji at the end. A day ago, A message like this would have sent me into a spiral of pure, unadulterated panic. My only response would have been to find a way to fake my own death to get out of it. But now, lying here in the dark, in this strange bed, in this strange body, my reaction was completely different. A slow smile spread across my face. And then, a soft, quiet laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound that hung in the silent room. A sound that I couldn't quite decipher myself. I didn't know if it was a laugh of anxiety or a laugh of anticipation. I didn't know if I was terrified or thrilled. The truth was, I was both. And for the first time, I was genuinely curious to see what tomorrow would bring.